just how surprised were you at your success?
Well, we're absolutely delighted by the success. But if you remember in June last year, when Nigel Farage, our leader, sat down with the press and said, I'm coming back to be leader of Reform UK, fight a campaign, not just in the general election, but obviously to run for a seat in Clacton-on-Sea to become the MP. He said this was part of a 5-year plan. We have been clear that we want to get Nigel elected as our Prime Minister in 2029 with a majority. We think we can get 350 to 400 Reform MPs. Won't be easy, but yesterday was a historic day. It was a historic day because it was the clear and decisive evidence that the stranglehold that the two old parties have had on British politics for 100 years is finally broken. And that means we can usher in a new era of politics in this country. And that's what we need if we're going to rejuvenate and revitalise the United Kingdom.
Let's unpack that in a moment, but there's a central question. I mean, Nigel Farage and Reform, they're in the same sentence. Could you have achieved what you have this week if, for example, Richard Tice had still been leader?
I work with Richard every day. Richard is a formidable politician, but the answer is no. Nigel is, I think it's clear, actually, that Nigel is the most formidable British politician, certainly of my lifetime, and it's a pleasure and an honour to work with him. And by the way, let me give you an example, just a little anecdote about that. In Runcorn and Helsby, where, of course, we won by 6 votes, Nigel visited, I think, 4 times in total. And on polling day, he must have done, we were joking, he must have done about 50,000 steps. He was knocking on doors till 10 p.m. Do you know who never showed up once? Keir Starmer, the Prime Minister. Why? Because probably a well-meaning special advisor said, oh, don't show up, we might lose. And, you know, Nigel leads from the front. Who dares wins, and we won.
You've got a lot of inexperienced people now. What are you doing to prepare them for office?
Well, they may not have much experience in politics, but they're great people. And by the way, you kind of need people who have had no hand in the catastrophic destruction of local communities in this country in order to rejuvenate them. So we are setting up, and obviously me as chairman, this rests on my shoulders, and we've been working non-stop. There's really been not much time to celebrate. We're getting all of our winning councillors together over the next 7 days, multiple times. We're setting up task forces. People watching this programme, we're setting up a recruitment drive for the brightest and best in this country, task forces to cut local waste, to help fix potholes, to ensure that bins are collected at least once, if not twice. These are the things that people voted for. They want common sense politics to return.
When you say you set up task forces, if I may say so, that sounds rather Starmer-right. They've set up a review or a task force every 2 or 3 days, and it's not quite what we'd have expected from Reform.
This is a task force that is very practical. These are people who will consult.
They're not going to go out and fill in past potholes, are they?
No, but we can look. If you take potholes, for example, this is something that you hear on the doorstep time and time again. You see in all of the polls, people are sick and tired of millions, if not tens of millions of pounds being spent locally by their councils, and not a single pothole is fixed. People watching this programme, I'm sure...
But how are you going to make that different?
OK, so there's a few things we need to do. Number one, we need to make sure that the procurement, the way that these contracts are procured, is done fairly. We have done a huge amount of work. It's one of the reasons we won these elections with such a landslide. We submitted thousands of freedom of information requests to get as much information as we can. From what we can tell, many of these contracts go to these companies that are basically an oligopoly with huge restrictions on new innovative entrants. You've got companies like JCB. Nigel visited them on the campaign trail with a product called the Pothole Pro, which is world-leading. These are not being used at scale in this country. So we need to change the way procurement is done, and that's what we're going to do.
You spoken this morning about remoralising the young. What do you mean by that?
What we need to do is instill a sense of pride in the United Kingdom, a sense of pride in our history. And right now there is a writ large demoralisation campaign that has happened for young people. And you hear it time and time and time again in schools. It's one reason why Reform is polling at 1 in 5 18 to 25-year-olds now support Reform, because they're sick and tired of it. And look, we are living in a competitive world. We're competing with countries who don't tell their young people that they should hate their country, that they should be ashamed of their history. And Reform is a deeply patriotic party, and we think we should ensure that children, at the very least, are not being indoctrinated to hate their country. And what they should really be doing, we should be ensuring that they are taught the great things that Britain has provided the world, because there are many, many things we should be proud of.
Let me ask you this then. You just won a major victory, which was fought because an MP punched a man in the street. your newly elected mayor, Andrea Jenkins, first became famous for giving the finger to protesters outside Downing Street. Now, are we supposed to think that politicians, whether they're Reform or not, are the right people to be giving the young moral guidance?
Trevor, with respect, are you equating what Dame Andrea Jenkins did with what Mike Amesbury did, which was punch repeatedly a constituent almost into unconsciousness?
I'm asking you if politicians of any stamp are the right people to be given moral guidance. And of course, these two things are not equivalent, but I could give you several different examples, some of which are quite unpleasant about what politicians have done, which don't seem to me to sound like remoralising anything.
Well, look, what we need to do is stop demoralising our young people. So what we're talking about is stop teaching young people in schools writ large that they should hate their country, that they should be ashamed. And look at the character...
Do you genuinely believe that teachers are going about telling children to hate their country?
Look at the character assassination that has taken place on the great Sir Winston Churchill. Look at it, and go and look at the views of young people that have been polled around Sir Winston Churchill. It is a travesty. How many of our young people know who Isambard Kingdom Brunel is and know all of the incredible things that Britain has given the world? Look, we make no apology for this. Young people should be taught history accurately. And the accurate history is, yes, of course, like any country, there are some aspects of our history we are not proud of. But the vast, vast majority of it, I'll tell you, is we should be hugely proud of. And I would put it to you, no country in the world has benefited the free world than the United Kingdom.
Are you sure you're not calling for the return of the nanny state, where the government tells people how to think and essentially indoctrinates children?
We currently have a nanny state. Yeah, I mean, I just finished an interview where I was asked where could councils cut waste. And I gave the example of Northamptonshire Council, which Reform now thankfully controls. They spent £1.1 million on handing out free vapes. Leicestershire County Council spent £500,000 on a finger-wagging campaign to tell their constituents to brush their teeth. That we live in a nanny state. That needs to stop. But I keep going back to it. We make no apologies. Young people should be taught about the great things that Britain has done for the world.
One of the things you want to do is to get rid of all the diversity and inclusion officials. Councillors cannot sack officials. How are you going to do that?
So what councils can do when they control the council...
cannot.
Councillors, what councillors can do when you control the council is there are vehicles by which... So the chief executive obviously has an important role to play. That role, there's a process by which the chief executive can be hired and fired. We will ensure that in those counties that we are in control of, that the money being spent, not just, by the way, so, you know, this has been misreported that we're just talking about DEI officers. There are huge amounts of money being spent, again, as far as we're concerned, on indoctrination programmes around DEI. We believe all hiring should be merit-based and colourblind, and I'm sure, Trevor, you'd agree with that.
So actually, if council under your control decides get rid of all the diversity and inclusion programmes and the people who do them, and chief executive says, no, I don't think that's really what we want to do, and by the way, it's my job to manage the staff, any chief executive who resists that can expect the sack.
It will be, look, we want to have a good relationship with the executive teams in the councils because they've got to do their job. But let's be clear about something. The people in the constituents are the ones who should determine where their taxpayer money is being spent. And the chief executive...
They can expect to be fired.
The chief executive must ensure that they are following the instructions of their constituents. And that's what our councils will ensure happens.
Just very briefly, will you work with Tories? Just 10 seconds.
There will not be a merger or a pact between Reform and the Conservatives. Why would we? We just beat them by 10 points in the elections yesterday.